out of the grad school, mess. Today I'm talking about embeddedness, imperfect communication, and the struggle to understand through a game that is pretty recent. It just came out in February of this year. Kevin, 1997 to 2077. I'm going to break all of the rules about public speaking, and I'm going to read my paper to you. So sorry about that, but it will keep me on time and on track. Okay, so discussing the future of text is a tricky proposition. The phrase to me conjures the thought of a linear trajectory through time in which text once wasn't, and then was, and will soon be something more complicated, more comprehensive, more complete. Rather than a timeline, perhaps it's better to borrow a heuristic from popular culture, as played out as the concept may have become already, the so-called multiverse. In a multiverse, the past and future coexist in a liminal present with room enough for dozens of Spider-Men, or Spider-Mans, countless Rick and Mortys, and all of the forms of text that ever was. In this way, we leave room for the idea that text might, in fact, regress in its development, that it might stop short of the ostensible ambition for universal understanding, and instead seek, first and foremost, the personal expression of its creator, reader be damned. Of all the media that text inhabits, digital games, as modular network systems of numerous recursive relationships occurring between modes of ergotics, semiotics, and procedurality, and the player, are perhaps most apt for such a textual multiverse. Game spaces, obstacles, characters, and the actions they take, each element that comprises the video game experience represents an untold number of smaller, more abstract unit operations, thank you, Bogus, overlapping in their individual processes to then be remediated by the interface to emerge into the perceptual field of the player. The digital game is a metalepsis of modes. Beyond multimodal, it is metamodal. When the game's processes are activated, that is, when they're played, we encounter the effects of those unit operations as, quote, elements that are fundamentally both system and communication at the same time, end quote. So where does that leave the text then? As everything, everywhere, all at once. Because digital games situate us within their virtual worlds, the production of meaning is no longer bound to the lexicon of language, but manifests through experience, in seeing, in doing, and even not doing. What we mean when we say text is becoming less about a passage of inscribed language and increasingly more about what we regard as an object of critical analysis, whatever that may be, spaces, obstacles, characters, and the actions they take. Kevin, 1997 to 2077, released in February 2024 by solo developer Kevin Du, I hope I'm getting that right, is described as both, quote, a language deciphering game, end quote, and a wander and wonder game, end quote. I'm tempted to also describe it as an open world hypertext. Gone are the structuring guard fields, not Garfields, and hyperlinks. The player may move to any portion of the text that they can find, yet the narrative is as non-linear and fragmented as any work of electronic literature, assuming, of course, that you can make heads or tails of it. Kevin's story is told through an invented hieroglyphic language that players must learn to read all by themselves, or at the very least with no help from the game itself, to present an innovative exploration into the intersections of language, identity, and human connection. The intentionally overwhelming design mirrors the creator's own experiences with language barriers and cultural assimilation, as he shares in an interview with GameDeveloper.com. Quote, when I came to Scotland for the first time, my English was bad and I was immersed in the Scottish accent. I almost could not understand anything, but I certainly knew the way by which they talked made complete sense, end quote. We might think of Kevin's design as immersive in the sense of language acquisition, even if it's not quite what we tend to think about when we call a video game immersive. After all, the game spaces, images pulled from Google Earth, create one massive two-dimensional field of play upon which players may move in any direction. Gradually, as players adapt to its unique language and narrative structure, the game becomes more accessible, each deciphered symbol inching us closer to understanding a phrase and then a complete idea, or so I assume. I have not made much headway here. Key to this work is the player's ability to inscribe directly onto the game spaces. making notes as they decode Kevin's story. This tool is perhaps the game's most developed interface. Players can choose between writing in 9 colors or erasing the previously written messages. In this way, the game seems to be just as much about writing as it is reading, and works to dissolve the conceptual differences between the two. Writing to read, to write, may just be as interactive as media can be. Yet even beyond the abstract language, the game's design resists the player's understanding. The game's audio, for instance, consists solely of a man's voice counting the seconds that go by, up to, I want to say it's like 16,000 and something. This distraction would make reading even the most basic English an exercise in mental focus, so you can imagine the level of difficulty it brings to the game's already obtuse proceedings. Dude remarks again, quote, "The language is a private language. I'm eager to be understood, but I didn't invite players to do so. The language is untranslatable due to the embedded understanding in it, which would be through their culture, languages they already know," end quote. We might argue then that Kevin is about the imperfect act of communicating openly, honestly, and fully with others, and being communicated to through inherently incomplete, inconsistent, and unstable means. The game confronts players with the inescapability of their own culture, of their own cultural worldview, for them to recognize the fullness of experiences others have outside of its bounds, albeit still bounded by their own. It presents sociality as a process for contingent outcomes, as games are themselves. This exploration of sociality within Kevin opens the door to a deeper examination of the ambiguity surrounding digital media authorship, and in turn the future of text. Thank you.
I think my watch is broken because it looks like you're on time. Questions, comments, dialogue.
Just curious about the game. I've not played this game. So it was published last year. Who published it? What in what format? What platform?
Kevin Du. It's on Steam and itch.
Okay.
Yeah, just a solo dev. He was talking with GameDeveloper.com ahead of some awards ceremony that he was nominated for, but I don't think he won. I haven't been able to find any information about it.
Is it web-based or is it built? I mean, what is it built on? Is it Unity or?
I think it might be Unity. I'm not 100% sure, but it is essentially Google Maps sort of stitched together, this writing all over it. And like I said, Kevin Du himself counting seconds.
Yeah. And again,
Oh, sorry.
Just one more game mechanics. Just
Right.
okay.
Yeah, and reading and moving, I suppose. Yeah.
So is there feedback to the user? Because, I mean, language evolved because we have complex societies. I mean, one can argue that other animals, they communicate but they don't have language. And this is a really interesting topic, but I don't understand why this is a basis for language when there's no social interaction. Because that is the only reason why we have language.
That's interesting. I mentioned that the player doesn't receive any help from the game, but there has grown a community of players who are sharing information, sharing their deciphers of the codes, and working together to sort of come up with what this could be.
So they're getting feedback because of the group, so they're creating a language within the user group, not.
This goes back to that first paragraph that I was talking about, where text is maybe becoming more of self-expression than really sort of information transmission, I should say.
So the structured language exists within the game, and the community is driven by their curiosity to decipher it.
Juanita.
Can I ask one question? I'm the novice here. You all are all smarter than me, so let me just say that.
I think so.
So thank you for being like in the corner of the room. But is it possible that the relationship that's happening, like is his counting designed to create a sense of time, meaning where the user recognizes they're in time, or to create a countdown, meaning they're working against time? Because I was wondering if the relationship of language is actually actually between the user as they're working out their logic and as they're working through the concept of time. As he's doing the countdown, does that create an engagement with text and an engagement with language that creates a community with him and the user, but through a very static kind of form of engagement where you're anticipating his countdown and simultaneously trying to decipher these hieroglyphics, which also aren't just words, they're numbers and symbols, which creates a whole different kind of interface in terms of language with this one static thing, which is time coming alongside of it. It's an interesting way to think about how the mental model of conversation works when you're working with or against time, I guess, is a question.
Yes. Yes, that sounds, yeah, sure. I think that sounds great.
That was smart.
That's really smart.